numbers 좀 써먹는다. 엔다.
The phone again?
Oh, any kind of phone.
Peggy or Ramona, can you hear us? Can you hear me?
All right. Well,
371.
That's on the call.
Anyway, that was there. That's why I
know.
was there. This one.
Yeah. Is that real? Hi. This is
Samsung.
Samsung?
Yeah.
Surely or
Okay, can-
Daryl Silverton.
Hello, people online, can you hear me? Hello?
Ms. Nelson,
We
Mrs.
can hear you.
Nelson.
Can you hear us?
Yes, now we can hear you, but you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear everything that's going on in the room.
Okay, thank you.
What's that beeping noise?
It's my laptop.
The laptop beeps?
Yeah.
Hello, this is Mardo. Can't hear you.
Cherry,
Wait, hold on, it's still red. Okay, so
Cherry.
Emo is the host.
Yeah,
Emo's the host right now.
Good
Good afternoon, Shanata. This is Sean McCabe. I'm on. I just got done with Hesse, so sorry I'm late.
I'll go ahead and unmute. I unmuted. Oh, I'm co-host.
So this is the presentation today?
Yes.
Mhm.
And then I also got sent to you guys at 1:45. So
Yeah.
I have digital copies.
It's nice and warm.
I know. My secretaries are still finishing binding some, so they're going to bring the rest over.
Okay. It's still red. It's working. Yeah, it's working. It was working earlier, but the
Owl
red.
is red.
We can hear you guys.
I don't know if anyone can hear us.
Earlier they could before.
Speak and just see if they hear you. We do hear you.
Hello, anyone on the call? Can you hear me speaking?
My share center says he can hear us,
Yeah,
I
he
think-
says he can hear us.
but when we speak, we don't.
When we speak, you don't seem to hear us.
Oh, this is Almardo.
They say they can hear us.
Is this your whole book of how you guys operate, or?
It's all the
I can
acts
hear you.
that are being amended
The procurement.
in there, and the regulations.
Oh, this is only the ARPA, right?
No,
Everything?
everything.
Okay, so
Everything.
this would be a good thing to have.
All the way down to the chapters.
Yeah.
All the way, yeah.
Get this Bible to him, read right there.
That one's on the camera right there.
Here, you can have a binder since there's
I
not.
got one here. That's the.
Peggy Binder?
Oh, yeah, great, thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't remember your name.
So this is gonna be amended, right? The ones that are,
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes.
This is what we have to.
Well, this is what you guys will decide.
so we're the one that have to pass it again.
No, it has to, well, the acts have to go to council, and then
Yeah.
the regulations would just go to BNF.
Yeah.
Correct.
So is email gonna come?
Well,
Did you guys get a response from email?
What did you say?
Nomination council and co-host.
Level Nation Council as co-host?
Yeah.
just like that, no.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, then he
She called me
says,
this now.
one of the DNF, she said, committee accounts is set as host and the others co-host. He said, council as co-host, not host.
Yep.
So,
As
yeah,
co-host.
he is.
Yeah, he's co-host.
Okay.
Oh, that promotion today.
Everything is connected to the owl is muted.
Who's
That's what Carl says. One is unmuted and the other is muted. But we can hear you. He has the volume turned on.
Oh, somebody unmuted the owl.
Okay, can you hear us now? Mr. Slater?
Yes, can you hear me?
It says, but we can hear you, but we can't hear them. Yeah.
So the volume on the owl, is there a button on here is there a plus and minus button on the bottom? Can you see?
Yeah, it's on the side.
That's the volume. Yeah. Vice Chair Slater, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me though?
It says muted.
Okay, try again.
Is anyone on the call? Okay, we see the chair, Jesus. Vice Chair Slater, we can't hear you. We don't know why we can't hear you. We can't even hear you from the laptop.
Yeah, the red button's for muted.
The laptops,
This is
we can't hear the
Lombardo.
audio from the owl.
We have to mute all ours because it'll squeal.
And then the owl's not giving off.
Let's see.
Nice.
Sharing
This is
some
Lombardo.
display.
Okay,
Hello?
yes.
Lamardo.
Slater.
Okay, we can hear Az right
Can
now.
we hear now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Please have to hear that beeping sound.
Is he on the phone?
It's the
though?
beeping?
Yeah, I have to have
Way.
beeping.
So what do you want us to do now?
It's on. I think you can hear.
Slater says he has two phones on. One of the
Can you
phones
hear
is,
me?
hold on.
Yeah.
Delegate Azert, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, there we
Now,
go.
okay. So
Loud
we
and
can
clear.
hear Lombardo, but we can't hear you, Carl.
Okay. You
Chair
still can't
Parrish,
hear
this
me
is
right now?
Doug Otto. I'm on the line.
Vice Chair Slater, we hear you. We also hear you, Delegate So, and then also Chair Jesus is also on the line. Any other delegates on the line?
Delegate Claw was on the line.
Honorable Claude.
Oh, okay. Delegate Claw is on the line? Okay.
Says Clarissa.
Any other delegates?
Amber was on the line.
Okay. I know more delegates are probably going to join on the call later on. But thank you all for your patience. We are in a new location today. We are in the Auditor General's conference room, and we're also using our new technology as well. So we took a second to set up and get things situated. We just want to thank you for your patience. Thank you to our advisor and also our budget and finance staff and the IT from the speaker's office who have set up today's meeting. I know it can be challenging setting up in different locations, but we appreciate all of our support here, a part of the Budget and Finance Committee. Welcome to everybody on the line. Thank you all, Department of Justice and Economic Development, for being here as well. Today is May 17th, 2023. It is 2:26, and I'll call today's work session to order. We're meeting in person. Delegate Norman, Bigay, and I are in person, and we also have members and delegates on the line as well. Again, the Zoom meeting ID is 23268. 232-628-2566, and our passcode is 86515. We're meeting in the Auditor General and the Government Development Conference Room in Winter Rock, Arizona today. In person, who's present is Delegate Norman Mbigay, and then also myself. I'll take roll call today. Why not? I'll do something different today. Do we have Shedda Delegate Amber Kadesba Crotty on the line? Second call, Shedda Delegate Amber Kadesba Crotty. Third call for Shedda Delegate Amber Knezba Crotty. No, she was on the line earlier, but we'll keep an eye out for her. And then is Delegate Lamardo Azeret on the line?
I'm online.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Do we have Delegate Seth Damon on the line? I know he texted me and he said he'll jump on about 2:40. But I'm gonna do a second call for Delegate Damon right now. Hearing none. Vice Chair Slater?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you. Awesome. All right. Thank you all for responding to roll call this afternoon, and thank you all for the members of the 25th Nomination Council who are also on the line. Welcome. Today we are going to begin with an invocation. I'll give a short invocation to get us started. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for another day to serve the Navajo Nation and the Navajo people. We also are grateful for today's weather. The moisture is needed on the Navajo Nation. We just thank you for providing the moisture today to the plants and animals, and also to our crops that we've just planted. We pray for safe travels for all of the members of the 25th Navajo Nation Council, our Navajo Nation President, our Vice President, also our Chief Justice, and the Navajo Nation employees. We thank you that you've given us another day to meet on such an important topic, and may you give us ears to listen, and also open our minds to a very, very important topic today. I thank you for the work that the Department of Justice and the Division of Economic Development and the Research and Development Committee is also doing alongside the Budget and Finance Committee. And I just pray a blessing for each and every one of the employees and members who are working diligently to serve the Navajo Nation. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we're going to move on to the purpose of today's work session. Today's purpose is to review the proposed amendments to the procurement regulations and also the Procurement Act. Is that correct? Okay. We're going to receive the report from Ms. Catherine Belzowski. Did I say her name correct?
Yes, you did.
Okay. The Assistant Attorney General of the Department of Justice, and also members of the Division of Economic Development. Also we have Mr. Mel Rodas, who is also on the line, who will help. So the Economic Development Unit from Department of Justice as well? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I'll turn the time over to Ms. Belzowski. I'm so sorry, thank you.
You're doing great. You're doing great. All right. So much fun. I hope you guys have drank some coffee and are just ready for a great time this afternoon.
3 minutes.
Okay. I know. So we've said, I just wanted to make sure everyone is aware that at 1:44, I did send out an email with the most updated versions of everything, so please make sure that you know, as we go through this discussion, you guys use those versions of the documents that are in the email that was sent again today at 1:44. We do have some hard copies here for people in the room, and then we'll send some of the hard copies back in case any of the delegates on the line would like to pick up a hard copy of everything. So we were able, I know at the last meeting yesterday, we had talked about how the regulations weren't complete. We were able to complete the regulations for this meeting. So the regulation version that is in your binder it's complete, minus the fact that we still need to do a little proofreading and clean up on it, but I would say it contains all the substance, like all the sections have all the relevant substance in it. So, but we still do need to go through for just like proofreading and editing purposes. So I know you guys are already probably found some like formatting issues with it, and just you're aware of them, and we will make sure that all that stuff is cleaned up prior to anything getting approved. So I just wanted to start today with a kind of, if you will, for all the Lord of the Rings fans, I want to do the little prelude, like the first minutes before the Fellowship of the Rings, where I just lay the groundwork for where we are with this, so that as we discuss the amendments, you guys have a sense of what the legal limitations that the Department of Justice is operating under, and that you guys probably, I don't know why I keep looking at this owl, like it's looking at me. I feel like it's looking at me. So you guys are aware of some of the legal limitations that we're operating under in many of these acts, and I think that may help inform your guys' discussion, because I will say, we have what we've given you guys today is really the Department of Justice's not first draft, but like it's what we have looked at based on, we've drafted based on input from our clients, from Division of Economic Development and from the Division of Community Development. But we're still, especially the Comptroller's Office, we still need to get feedback from them on these. They haven't, I don't think they've had a chance to really digest them. And I think as the primary department that will be implementing, we welcome their feedback, and we really do look forward to their thoughts on some of these proposed amendments. We undertook these amendments with the idea of trying to make procurement on the Navajo Nation easier. I don't know if we succeeded. You guys will be the judge of that. But to really try to, right now the current amendment and regulations, one, they don't match, so it makes it hard to procure on the nation because people are constantly trying to read the tea leaves. And then the Navajo Business Opportunity Act, which also works with the Procurement Act and regulations, doesn't necessarily jive with them. So we've run into a lot of situations, and we'll talk a little bit about those today, where that's led to tension and litigation against the nation. And so our hope is that by taking a comprehensive look at the Navajo Business Opportunity Act and the Procurement Act, of moving those acts together at the same time, will help alleviate those issues and allow these acts to work harmoniously. Which I don't think they've probably done since they were I don't know if they've ever done it. So this may be the first time because the acts were passed at different times. So let me just kind of give you a little bit, because I know that the agenda just says procurement, but would like to start you guys off with the Business Opportunity Act. And the reason for that is because procurement is, the amendments we can make to procurement are limited by what we can make, changes we can make to the Business Opportunity Act. And that's because of a little court case that's, at least I think me and Mr. Silversmith's favorite case, Inaba, that came out of the Navajo Supreme Court back in 2014. And what that case held, which at that time, was that the Navajo, it basically said the Navajo Business Opportunity Act, and the preference that's included in, included in the Navajo Bill of Rights, Section 2, which says that all Navajos have a right to economic development, is the supreme law of the land, right? So when you think about your hierarchy of laws, you got your Bill of Rights, your code, your regulations, your policy. So what the Supreme Court did in that 2014 case is they elevated what the Business Opportunity Act does, which gives that preference. That's in the Bill of Rights, Section 2. It gives that preference to Navajo businesses. It says how that preference is given in contracting. It said this is basically the equivalent to, a civil right for Navajo Nation. So you Navajo Nation, because in that case we didn't apply business preference to a contract, and the Navajo Nation Supreme Court said that is not okay. So we always have to think about that when we're looking at procurement, because if we ever try to not apply, apply Navajo preference in procurement for the Navajo Nation, we run the risk of a court case, and of people challenging that and saying that we're violating their Bill of Rights. And so that's why we want, it's so important to move the Business Opportunity Act with procurement. You need them to all work together, or else they're not going, or else you're not, and that's why you'll see in the Procurement Act so many references to the MBOA, because we always have to be in compliance with the MBOA, because anytime we're not in compliance with the MBOA, someone could say, you're violating my Bill of Rights, you're not giving me preference, I'm entitled to preference under the Bill of Rights, Section 2. So that's kind of the lanes. And so all the amendments that are made are kind of made in that, trying to make sure that we're maintaining that. We're maintaining that directive from the Supreme Court. So I actually wanted to turn some time over to Mr. Silversmith from the Business Regulatory Department, because he's the one who actually he initiated the discussions to amend the Business Opportunity Act. And so I thought it would be helpful for him to give some background on what his office has seen and kind of what ones they were looking at in when they requested these amendments.
Catherine, before we do that,
Yeah.
can we have members of the Research and Development Committee here who haven't heard the preliminary discussion that we've had. Could you maybe give the background of the difference between the act, the regulations, and the order that we're going to follow?
Yeah, so no problem. So very quickly. No, so we just went over the fact that the Supreme Court has looked at, has elevated preference in business contracting to well, I don't know if they've elevated it, but they've read it into the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights is like your guys' like highest law of the land. Well, I guess, maybe fundamental, then Bill of Rights, then the Navajo Nation Code, then your regulations. So we have to, all the laws we pass have to comply with the Bill of Rights. So there was a case back in 2014, I'm sorry, this is being super brief, I don't know how, I'm a lawyer, in 2014 that said, where we, the Navajo Nation, we didn't apply preference to contracting. We didn't give any preference to Navajo businesses when we hired an architect or an engineer. And the Supreme Court said that violated their Bill of Rights. So every time the Navajo Nation procures, we always have to give preference. We always have to, in some manner, to our Navajo entities, or else we run the risk of violating their Bill of Rights. And so the Business Opportunity Act, which is in your guys' packet, which is the first one in your packet, that really implements Navajo businesses' rights to preference under Title II. It gives that priority and allows them, it's kind of like the implementation of that Bill of Rights, if that makes sense. And so, I'm sorry, I don't want to talk on too much. Is that sufficient? Okay.
I think that's great.
Yeah, so that's why we're doing this. That's why we're doing this at the same time.
This is also the Vice Chair of the Research and Development Committee, Casey Johnson, and then also Shauna Claus here with us in person. Okay, yeah.
Okay, thanks. So, Mr. Silversmith is the one that, he's the manager of the Business Regulatory Department, and he's the one who was he requested these at the same time Council requested the Procurement Act amendments. So we've been trying to do everything at the same time. So I would like to turn some time to Mr. Silversmith to kind of give you guys an idea of where the department's coming from with these amendments.
Let me introduce myself first. Shea Notisi Silversmith in Shea Hanagahani National Kiani Bushes Chin Italian Dashiche Todaji Dashinella, and I'm originally from Steamboat, and I reside in Twin Lakes with my family. I have a bachelor's in business administration with an emphasis in human resources management, and I've been with the Business Regulatory Department since April of 2021. So that's kind of brief history of my term with Business Regulatory Department. I'll let Mr. Alvin Wanika introduce himself really briefly.
Good afternoon, Yate. Here, Alvin Wanika, and here, and this is Kachi. Kana Sosne, Bushichi, Ashim, Bushichi, Kiani, Senior Economic Development Specialist with the Business Regulatory Department, and I've been here for 4 years. So that's why I'm here to address any questions the committee may have.
Yeah. So he's my right-hand man. He really helps with the development and everything with the office. I go to him for a lot of consultation and anything that I kind of have questions on. So just a brief history. I came on in April 2021. I was asked then by my boss, JT Willie, the then Division Director of Economic Development, to look at amending and getting some public meetings going for the Navajo Business Opportunity Act. At that time, I went ahead and did that and went ahead forward with advertising for the events. I helped 3 of them, or the office helped 3 of them. One in May of 2021, June of 2021, and July of 2021. So there were 3 sessions, and all of them were conducted via Zoom, and we had a pretty good audience of Navajo businesses, some departments, and a few council delegates at the time. So we got public comment. We gathered comments. We set a deadline. I think it was in August of 2021 for comments and public comments, and there was a few submitted. Those that we did receive, we passed on and considered and passed them on to Ms. Bazalski here. And that's kind of where we're at now. So MBOA came into law in 2001, was amended in 2005, 2014, the Enoba case, and then 2021, we had the public meetings, and here we are now looking to amend it. And it just so happens to be in line with the procurement code as well, and when those are coming up. So we've been kind of looking at all of that stuff within the past year or so. I'm working on it. And we've had a few work sessions on it as well with internally with our office and with DOJ.
Yeah, and sorry, just one point of clarification. It actually came into law in 1985. It predates the
Yeah.
Procurement Act.
Yeah, I have that in there, so. Okay.
Okay.
I think you're all caught up, and that's where we're at, and we've worked hard and diligently on these things, and I'd like to give a lot of credit to DOJ for just how they've helped us, and they've really been meeting the timelines and keeping up on it, so thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Thank you,
So,
Mr.
yeah.
Silversmith. And then I just wanted to just make an announcement. We have the room until 5. So I know this is for budget and finance. It's an update on the status of that. So we'll just continue. Just want to make that.
And then if I missed anything, Mr. Wanika can chime in, but pretty much that's really where we're at, and we're looking to get this approved, and we're really looking forward to updating these laws and getting them kind of current with the current times and just kind of updating the language. It's been so long. So that's kind of what I'm here with. My primary focus at BRD is to update all of the laws and stuff within our office and kind of get those taken care of. So that's kind of where we're at. That's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. All right. So for your guys's, so just a couple things to highlight on the end. I'm just call it the NBOA. So the NBOA, it applies to every business on the Navajo Nation. This is different than the Procurement Act, which only applies to the government. So every business on the Navajo Nation is supposed to be giving priority in contracting to Navajo businesses. Whether that's happening, I will leave that to BRD to say. But so it's a very broad. So the law, it does the two things it does that are really important is it establishes the priorities. So when you hear about priorities, business getting the preference, right? This is where it comes from. So the Procurement Act applies when we procure as an Navajo Nation. We have to give preference to priority businesses. The NBOA says what that is. So for example, if you guys look at section, let's see, 205, which is on page 7 of 13 of the clean version, which is the first document on your guys' packet. This is the priority 1. This is where it creates priority 1 and priority 2. So when people say I'm a priority 1 business, what does that mean? It means they're 100% Navajo owned. When they say they're priority 2, what does that mean? And it means all the things that are listed here in 205A2. But we're not for the purposes of these amendments, we're not changing what is considered a priority 1 or 2. The thing that we've added though are nonprofits. Prior to the amendments before you, nonprofits were not talked about in the NABOA. But one of the comments that we received from Business Regulatory is there are a lot of nonprofits, especially Navajo nonprofits, that would like to have preference so that when they apply for contracts with the nation, they can qualify, or with other entities, they're able to get preference, because right now they're not. Because we just haven't been able to, or I should say it's been a little touch and go. It hasn't been clear. It's been applied very sporadically. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Especially at the chapter level too. So.
Yeah, so one of the things with these amendments is trying to provide that guidance. We define nonprofits. We give guidance to BRD on how they're supposed to determine whether a nonprofit is Navajo owned or not. And then we allow those nonprofits to get preference for contracting under these amendments. The other thing that's section 206 is the procedures in procurement, and this is where it really ties into the Procurement Act amendments. So what 206 does is it takes the amendments that we've incorporated into the Procurement Act and regulations, and it puts it into the NBOA. Right now, the NBOA and the Procurement Act do not jive. So and we've run into situations where there's been people are saying, well, it doesn't apply to this kind of procurement, or it only applies to bids. It doesn't apply to proposals, or it applies to all of them. So there's very inconsistent application of how people are supposed to utilize the NBOA currently under the procurement process. And part of that has to do with the fact that during the like past 3 amendments of the NBOA, the word bid and proposal have changed meaning. What bid meant in 1985 has changed to what it means today under the Procurement Act, and proposal and likewise, and we'll kind of get into, we'll get into that. But the NBOA hasn't kept up. So the terminology that's being used currently in the NBOA is being applied very inconsistently by private entities and by the Navajo Nation. And so what we've tried to do here is clarify how you apply the NBOA if you're doing an invitation for bid, if you're doing a request for proposal, if you're doing a request for qualifications. You know, how are you supposed to apply this law? Because you need to apply it in some form, or else you run the risk of being held in violation of the Navajo Bill of Rights, right? And so what this does is try to make very clear, when you're procuring, this is how you are going to apply the NBOA to your procurements. We tried to, because this doesn't just apply to the Navajo Nation, we try to keep it general, because McDonald's doesn't apply, procure necessarily the same way we do. Winslow Health Center doesn't procure the same way we do. But to the greatest extent possible, we try to make it broad, but still, give all these entities guidance on, if you're procuring on the nation, this is how you should be considering it. And I know that's really, our enterprises are like, oh, we're not sure how to apply it to this kind of procurement, and sometimes they don't. And we're like, no, you still need to do it. And they're like, do we? And so those are really I would say, and then we took a lot of the definitions from the Procurement Act and put it in the NBOA, so they're both using the same definition. So it's not definition is, for bid is different than in this act than it is in this act. We use the same definitions in both acts so that they can be interpreted, hopefully, consistently. Everything regarding monitoring, enforcement, appeals, all that stuff pretty much stayed the same. It just got moved around. We didn't make too many, I don't think, substantive changes to those provisions. The real big substantive changes are in the 205, what is considered the new 205, 206. Is there anything, and I think that's kind of like the broad, that's pretty much like the broad overview of the amendments to this act. But just to, kind of hit home, if this doesn't get amended at the same time you guys do your Procurement Act amendments, there's going to continue to be a lot of confusion, especially with the enterprises and the LGA certified chapters on how they're going to be supposed to be applying this. And then, just kind of an FYI on that. I don't know if you guys have questions or if you'd like to go into more detail on this act or these amendments. Definitely happy to talk through it.
Yeah, sure. Delegate Begay has a question.
Thank you. On this agreement, I guess you said the preference to being a Navajo to get the contract.
Mm-hmm. Navajo owned, yeah.
Yeah, so does Navajo Nation have a pay scale that they have to, like the federal government offers you a contract, they have to give it at a federal rate, right? Standard. Where does Navajo Nation contract, how do they deal with that? I know like on the federal land, when you offer a contract to a contractor,
Mm-hmm.
they're supposed to pay the highest wages there is. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what's going on there, because I think I got some questions really too. It's not right with the way the people are being treated, even though they're getting the preference contract. And then the second one is that the workers, they're getting the short end of the stick of getting hired, and they're getting low wages, like $7, $8, and then and then these contractors do terrible job. That is that they're only on the Navajo Nation. Like I'm dealing with the one over in Torchilate, the contractor did the road, so they don't want to go back, I guess, and kind of deal with that road now, so that's our own people, that's doing this, and I don't know, the law needs to be written a little bit different, I think, because if you're a native, you want things done good, like our craft, the way we've been looked at,
And here you get a contractor like NHA Homes, you know, they're all crooked, right? Nobody. These are some of the issues that we should kind of look into, how the contract, you know, even then the carpenters are not being paid the minimum, a federal standard of making like $30, $40 an hour, whatever the going rate is. You know, Navajo Nation is way down here, but we're using federal money. That's what that contract, like you said, the laws up here are different. We're trying to follow that law, right? I think we have a big problem in between that, what's up here in concrete, and from down here looking up and say, you know, looking at get these contracts for our own people, you know?
Right. And I will say, so I hear, can I,
Yes.
am I allowed to, sorry. I know I'm really bad at, so just stop me if I get out of line. So there's a couple issues. For the pay, that's the Navajo Labor and Relations Act, Navajo Labor Relations Act. That's really where you address the
But see,
pay.
the question is federal dollars.
So for federal dollars, when we do, so like for the ARPA money, a good example is like the bathroom additions currently with, that you guys allocated money for under 29-22. That's a construction contract, and because that is federal money, there are certain requirements under ARPA that we have to put in that contract, such as wage rates. So when I drafted the contract for the contractor to do those bathroom additions, I had to include the federal wage rates in that, because that was part of the agreement we, the nation, entered into with the federal government. We said, we'll take your money, thank you, we'll take your money, federal government. Government goes, okay, and then you're gonna put all these provisions in your contract, which included the wage rate. So for the feds money, if the grant, the agreement we signed says we have to put in those terms, we'll put those terms in to the contracts. And that will require the contractor to comply with those rates.
So that money would just come floating down, and then you would just have Navajo Nation law here, right?
Well, because it's federal money, like you're saying, we have to comply with the requirement, with the strings they put on it. And so one of the strings is the wage rates. But if they don't put those strings on it, we are not required to put that language into our contracts. So it depends on how the grant agreement is between us and the federal government.
So we throw ARPA money in there, so where do we stand with that?
With which one?
Of all the projects that you think we're gonna do? I mean,
I just see
like the water pipelines, construction for the homes, and all that stuff. You know, it's federal money. So,
right.
And over here at the chapters, they want to pay $9, $8 an hour. I mean, to me, there's a little conflict of how this.
Well, I mean.
And then Catherine, just for clarification, the procurement process then is generally for Navajo dollars. That's why. So this act is specifically for the process that the government is going to follow. But then because ARPA dollars are federal dollars, then
see, that's what I'm saying. That.
Well, this is the programs based on the program and the money that they have, right? So when CPMD gets money to build something, they get money from the state of New Mexico, Navajo Nation, feds, right? And depending on their funding source, we'll determine which provisions we put in the contract. So if they're getting ARPA money and they're doing a project with ARPA money, we'll put the Davis-Bacon wage language in. If they're getting CSN money, then we don't have to put that in. So it just depends on but that wouldn't be, but that's a funding source based, that's not procurement based.
And then I believe Delegate Damon has a question. Speaker Damon. Speaker Damon.
Thank you. I don't think the presentation is done, so I will ask one at the end.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we're in a conversation with the whole Budget and Finance Committee, so we'd like to hear the entire presentation and really get into what the changes are.
Yeah, and then just the last to respond to, I think the last point is this idea of of contractors doing work on the Navajo Nation, and this is something that I think that has been a common complaint from a lot of entities. It's like we give this preference, yet the Navajo contractors we're hiring aren't doing good work, and I think that's part of that has to do with managing, right? You have to have project managing on the nation is hard. We don't have a lot of project managers. But the idea is that good project managers will make sure that our contractors are doing good work. But the problem is we don't have great project managers, not because they, in the sense that we don't have a lot of them. So our project managers are just stretched very thin, and they don't, or if you're having an entity project managed that doesn't really have any experience project managing, like maybe that Tohajali Road project, I don't know, they don't know what they're looking for, right? And, you know, something to note, just kind of for you guys to think about, is that we're a little, I think we're unique in the sense that we make everybody procure, right? Fish and Wildlife has to know procurement. You know, the biologist at Fish and Wildlife has to know procurement. The administrative assistant at Doty has to know procurement. They know how to, and then not only are they procuring, but then they have to project manage what they're procuring, right? Whereas in like the federal government, they have a whole department that procures for the government. So the biologist isn't procuring, they send the request to the department that the procurement department procures, right? And so, you know, it's just, we have a high turnover and we expect, I think we expect a lot, you know, and I think that that's something that BRD is constantly seeing because they're constantly, having to re-educate people. And the way that we try to address this issue on both in the Procurement Act and in the NBOA of having qualified contractors is that we give the program the ability to say, listen, you don't have to just hire someone that because they're Navajo, they have to be qualified, right? It's not an automatic, oh, you're Navajo, you get the contract. It's you have to show the program that you're qualified to do the scope of work that they've asked you to do. And if you don't show them that you can do that, they don't have to hire you. But that requires the person who's procuring to know what the scope of work is, right? And they have to know the project and they have to be able to qualify the contractor. And if they don't know what they're looking for when they're hiring someone to fix a road, they may hire someone who may not be qualified. So these are all the considerations, but at least the law gives the programs that ability to say, we don't have to, it gives them some flexibility so they, just because they're a Navajo Priority 1 business, they don't have to hire them if they don't demonstrate to them that qualification. So that's, okay. So I think that's MBOA.
Yeah. And just to add to that, the law is there to give preference to Native American and Navajo-owned businesses, I mean, that's what it's there for. It's not, like she said, it's not obligating programs to use it and go about that. They do have to qualify. They do have to meet the RFP specifications. There's certain parameters you have to meet. And I think that's one of the misconceptions of the MBOA is a lot of businesses just automatically assume like, oh, I'm Navajo and I get preference, and they're not even on the source listing or, that kind of deal. So there's a lot of misinformation, and that's why we're here. We do outreach, and we're always constantly trying to do outreach, and that's kind of one of my main goals here at BRD is kind of to get it educated and reach out to the chapters and the programs and things of that such. So just to add to that, thank you.
And I don't know, would you guys like us to just move on to the Procurement Act?
I think that most of the committee would like to hear the changes to the Procurement Act, the regulations.
So I'm going to dismiss Division of Economic Development from for the next portion then. All right, so Procurement Act. Okay, so you guys have two documents, the Procurement Act and the Procurement Rules and Regulations before you. I think Procurement Act is first and then the regulations. So let's see, so for the Procurement Act, I would say the biggest changes is we slimmed it down. We tried to cut some of the provisions from the Procurement Act and put them in the regulations. And the reason for this, Mr. Delegate Johnson?
Where's that document at? It's one of them.
It's the third document in your binder. Or second. Maybe the second.
The first two.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Procurement Act, we try to slim it down. We put a lot of, the Procurement Act that's currently in the code has a lot of policy in it. We tried to move as much of that policy as we could to the regulations because the regulations are more fluid and allow more change, are easier to change and update with the times. So that's one of the things that you may notice is some of the stuff that was in the act is now in the regulations. The other thing is the methods of procurement. So currently, the way that you can procure on the Navajo Nation is you can do a competitive procurement, either for bids or proposals. You can do a sole source procurement, which means you just give the project to one particular vendor. You can do a small purchase, which is currently anything under $50,000, or you can do an emergency procurement, which COVID, right? Emergency. If you have an emergency, you can procure. What we've done is we've added more methods to procure, and we've done this as in an attempt to try to give people more options to procure faster and easier. So currently what you'll see is that you have the micro purchases, which you guys approved at your last BNF meeting. You have direct source procurement and you have solo source procurement. And this is just an attempt to try to give our programs more options to get to where they're going, faster. So I think I'm trying to see some of what our other big ones are.
Catherine?
Yes, Lily. So sorry. So I'd like to introduce Lillian Schwales, who is my colleague at the Economic Community Development Unit, and really this has been her baby. I really appreciate all the work Lily has done on these. So Lily, would you like to add?
I was just going to say that in addition to adding, we've also explained methods that are currently in the Act. They're just not explicitly noted. Number-wise, we went from 7 procurement methods to 9 procurement methods. And the other one would have been requests for competitive solicitation for professional services, like attorneys or architects, and then the construction procurement that's still there.
And we provided a lot more definitions, a lot more definitions to try to help clarify some of the questions that had come up, at least from our clients, on how to do this procurement. So I don't know I'm trying to think of kind of like the best way to go about it. I don't know if you guys want to go through the Act, or would you kind of just like us to discuss some of the big changes to the rules and regulations and maybe talk about them comprehensively? What I guess makes the most sense, because there's a lot of different paths through this forest.
Okay, let's see. Okay.
Because we could go through like method by method and just kind of go over the different procurement methods that are in here.
I think you gave a good overview. Yeah, let's do that. We'll go method by method.
Okay. So I'm actually going to tag in Lily for the first method. So let's start with the competitive methods, right? These are the methods. There's bids and there's proposals. And bids and proposals on the Navajo Nation do not work the same way they work on the outside world. So let us just all acknowledge that a little bit. Because I know my clients like to always say bid, 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 and I think everyone likes to say bid, bid, bid. Bid means something very specific, as BRD knows, very specific on the Navajo Nation. We use it when we're procuring usually 90% of the time for goods. So like people like to put out invitation for bids there's like, oh, I put out an ITB for construction. No, you did not. You did not put it out an ITB for construction, because construction is a service. And for services, you're going to use a different form of procurement. So this is just something for you guys to know, like when you're talking to your chapters, or when you know the lingo that you may hear, people will always say like, I put out a bid, I got a bid. And the reason, and that they're defined as currently under the laws, they're defined as 2 different things. And so when someone says I did a bid, under our current laws, they can only use it if they're going to procure for goods, right? And so what are goods, right? Goods are computers, goods are paper, goods are pens. And when our programs procure for services, they have to use proposals, a competitive seal, what we call competitive sealed proposals. And this is kind of where it currently is. And so, so Lily, do you want to highlight the kind of the larger, if any, changes to the competitive sealed bidding process that we incorporated in the act and the regulations?
Certainly. So the current act as adopted is much more explicit about procurement for goods as defined in both the code and the act. And so it uses this competitive sealed bidding to issue an invitation for bid to buy goods. As it's adopted now with these amendments, it's not explicitly for goods. When you're issuing a procurement trying to get something using this competitive sealed bid, what you're doing is you're seeking a good or service at where the only thing you're looking for is the lowest possible price. And so competitive sealed bidding is based entirely on the lowest possible price, which is, generally speaking, always going to be a good. So even though it doesn't explicitly apply it to goods, it is still a good. Let me get my computer going. And the process overall hasn't necessarily changed extensively. We actually have to go up to the pre-solicitation section that applies to every method, which I'm trying to find. Section chapter 5 or 4.
3.
It's 4 in what I have.
Okay.
Oh, you're in the act. Sorry, I was looking at the process of the regulations.
Act, yeah.
So in the regulations, which is a little bit more descriptive, it tells you the things that you have to do prior to issuing a solicitation. And this applies no matter what you're doing, no matter which type of solicitation. And the idea here is that you have to actually think things through before you put out your solicitation. And that's everything from establishing your maximum feasible price to putting your purchase description together, your goods specification. You actually have to know what you're getting and put it all together. And then do we want to go into the process for competitive sealed bidding?
I will say the maximum feasible price is something that's both in NABOA currently and in our Procurement Act. So our programs are supposed to always have that set prior to them procuring. They're supposed to have that magical mystical number that they cannot, that the contractors can't go over, right? Would you say they do that?
No.
No. It's a requirement of the code. They're supposed to do that.
Even with the Lord of the Rings reference, you got to keep it secret, keep it safe.
I know, and you got to keep it secret, keep it safe. Don't tell anybody. So, if you're just basing something off price and you just want the lowest price, you'll bid it out. If you just want something and if that's the only consideration you can use the sealed bid. If you want to hire someone based on their qualifications and consider the price, that's when you would use a sealed proposal. Because under the sealed proposals, you can use price. You can use price as a factor, but it can't be the only factor. Do you think our programs understand that?
I hope so. I mean, that's what we're teaching, and that's what my employees look out for, and they do have to have the MFC set, and all the bid openings I've attended, it was set, and they had a price they couldn't go over, and then they're always enforcing the 5% on negotiations at the top on the ceiling, so.
Yeah, and for the seal, the seal proposals are like when you want to be able to when you want to hire someone, you want to see what their qualifications are. So usually that's the criteria. So if you guys have ever tried to procure at the, and you have a criteria, let's say you want to show them that they're licensed, are you licensed to actually do construction? Do you have a license for construction? That could be a criteria. Do you want to show that they have X amount of years in the field? That's a criteria. And then you can have price be a criteria, right? But even if you don't have price be a criteria, they still can't go for the maximum feasible price, because that's what our, yeah, go ahead.
I would say a criterion could be sort of 5 years at practice in this service that you're doing, training service, not construction service, because that's a separate procurement method. So it's like you're looking for someone with 5 years experience, someone who has worked with sort of a set grouping of individuals, someone who speaks Navajo. Those can be evaluative criteria for the request for proposal that you issue under the competitive sealed proposals.
And then that gets into the last competitive option, which is the competitive selection of professional services. This is what we have been calling RFQs currently under our laws. So under the law right now, you can do an ITB, an RFP, an RFQ, request for qualifications. The current law does not really speak provide a lot of detail on how to do RFQs, and that's something that really was added a lot into these amendments, both in the Act and the regulations. There's a lot more guidance on how to do requests for qualifications, how to procure for that. Professional services, lawyers, architects, surveyors. This is when you want to hire someone and you're not necessary, but you can't consider price at all. You just want to look at their resume. You want to hire the most qualified architect to build your building, right? This is when you would use an RFQ. When you're not going to because under the way that we have written the amendments, you can't look and see what the cost is. And this is something that I think my clients have a lot of anxiety around, because they always want to look at that amount, right? When they're looking at the architect, they always are like, well, they look qualified, but how much are they going to charge me, right? But if they're going to use, which they can do if they do the proposal method, but if they do the qualifications method, and this is where I see that tension currently, people say they want the most qualified, and we want the most qualified person, but then they always kind of look at how much that qualified person is going to cost them. And so if you really truly just want the most qualified person to do the job, you'll do an RFQ, because that you can only look at the price after you've determined who you're going to hire. If you want to be able to consider that price as part of your criteria, that's when you're going to use the RFP. So it's a little, it's really how does some of it has to do too with how, because you could hire an attorney under an RFP, but if you want to be able to consider the price in the evaluation. So these are the 3 competitive methods.
Let me
go ahead.
On the RSQ. When you're trying to issue an RSQ for professional services, you do still have to set a maximum feasible price. So even though you're not looking at offers based on the price, you still have to know how much you're able to spend. And when it comes to the selection of your highest qualified individual, at the time of making the award, you are able to ensure that you stay within the maximum feasible price. So you don't just pick the highest qualified person no matter what the cost. You pick the highest qualified person within your maximum feasible price at a fair and reasonable cost. Just a little more info.
No. Hey, Lily, just an FYI, your internet's going in and out a little bit.
Yeah, I noticed it grows.
Our internet's unstable, apparently.
You don't want to use like. Right on the screen.
I will say, sorry, I just want to go back, something to note about the changes for the competitive process. And this is a change that you guys made in the regulations already, that it has to be made in NABOA to really be effective. And this is one of the big changes, is the reference to newspapers. You guys amended the regulations to get rid of the reference to newspapers. NABOA still requires newspapers. So in order to really get rid of that newspaper requirement, we've removed the reference to newspapers in NABOA. So now no one is saying newspapers. They can do it, but they don't have to. We have also, I don't know if NOJA has seen this, we've written BRD in as the entity that would be, where programs would post these RFPs, RFQs, ITBs. So they would run, I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, we're aware of it.
You're the website management entity.
Yeah, you would run the website where the departments would go to post all of the requests for services, and that's written into the, is that in the act or the regulations, Lily?
It is in the regulations.
The regulations?
In
Okay.
the act, it just generally suggests that someone should do it.
And the regulations identify BRD as the entity with that sweet ARPA money that they have. They can set that up. So our clients, so those are the competitive methods that you can use. Again, the biggest changes are the fact that we've really fleshed out that competitive selection for professional services, which used to be RFQs and now is selection for professional services.
You still do issue a request for statement of qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still the same there. It just the official fancy lawyer title is competitive selection for professional services.
So what everyone in the room probably wants to know is, how can I not do a competitive procurement? How do I get around it? How can I do something faster? What all our clients want to know. And that's everything under those three. So 344, 345, 346, 347, 348, these are all non-competitive. So if an entity qualifies for any of these other procurement methods, they don't have to issue that RFP, post it on the website, get in the proposals, do criterias. They can do, their procurement process is going to be a little faster. And so for small purchases, the biggest change is we took out the limit of 50,000, which is currently set. We took that out of the act, and we took out the limit in the act, because I think that's really, having to go to the act every time you guys may want to increase the limit can be cumbersome, especially, it hasn't been changed. I don't think it's been changed since like 2000. So we've moved it to the regulations and we upped it to 100,000. And I will say something to note for, you may say, why did you use to 100,000? Why not this moon? Small purchases runs that fine line of trying to make sure that we're not, because you don't have to do because the application of NABOA is less for small purchases. You potentially, if you make small purchases so large and encompassing, you run the risk of getting a NABOA, or I shouldn't say a NABOA, a Bill of Rights complaint filed against you, right? So we want to increase small purchases to give programs some more flexibility, but we also don't want to increase it so much that we're undercutting that Navajo business preference. So what do I mean by that? For Navajo, for small purchases under NABOA, right, you're not going to do, because you're not opening proposals, you're not opening bids. The way that you give preference when you're doing proposal and bid openings is you open the priority ones first. So priority one proposals get opened first. They get evaluated first, and the program determines if any of the priority ones meet the criteria that's set out in the RFP. If no priority ones meet the criteria, if they don't have the years of experience, right, that's indicated in the RFP, if they don't have the insurance, if they can't provide the bid security, you go to the priority twos. If none of those, and you open those up. If none of those guys meet the qualifications, then you go to the non-Navajos. For small purchases, you don't apply that NABOA that process that's indicated in NABOA of giving that preference, right? So what they do is they just have to show that they've contacted the relevant, or I should say the potentially relevant Navajo businesses on the source list. The source list is established under NABOA. That's anybody who submits an application and gets qualified as a priority one or two goes on the source list. So for small, if you're under 100,000, you can just go to that source list, see if anybody on that source list does the work you want done, and then you just contact those individuals. So a really good example of this as it currently works is for appraisals, right? So for appraisals for like land, anytime the small businesses in appraisals on land, they have to hire an appraiser, and they usually cost under like $10,000. So they use small purchase. And so what they do is they go to the source list, they send out a letter to all of the people on the source list who say they do land appraisers. They send up a letter, say, hey, we need someone to appraise this land in Shiprock. You know, are you interested? And sometimes they get response back and sometimes they don't. And if they don't get response back from any of the Navajo entities, they can then go to a non-Navajo entity. And so that's how it's currently working. And so we're keeping mostly that same process, but we're raising the limit from 50 to 100. And as you can see, you know, potentially that could lead to some, you know, maybe shenanigans who, you know, not to say we have bad actors, but we don't want to make it so that the Navajos we're infringing on their right to land preference. So we're trying to really walk that line. So that's kind of the biggest thing for small purchases. The process is still going to remain the same. It's just allowing a higher limit for small purchases. Lily, did I miss anything on that? Oh, can't hear you. Muted.
Hey, this is Sean McCabe.
Oh, go ahead.
I think you know, these limit increases are definitely a step in the right direction, and I just want to assure BNF that, you know, as we move forward, you know, the discussion, you know, frankly, as a you know, a Navajo business owner myself, I wish this discussion happened sooner. But, you know, what I will say is I want to ensure BNF that as we move forward with these changes, I know it sounds daunting and even a little bit risky or scary to some level, but, you know, it's important to know that whatever increases and concerns might arise out of increases to procurement levels, you know, we will definitely work to make sure we have controls and mitigating controls so that our risk doesn't go up. And I've got to also mention to the committee that these types of increases are not uncommon. These happen, like I've told you before, I've done audits all over Indian country, and these types of limits are pretty common in Indian country, so we can make it work here as well. So yeah, shut that.
Thank you, Mr. McCabe. We'll just stick with the presentation from the Department of Justice at this time.
To follow up, I would say that like this increased $100,000 is consistent with surrounding jurisdictions like states and the federal government in terms of the small purchases. The small purchase only goes down to $10,000.01, and we'll move on to that briefly. But the one thing I would add in this particular moment is to ensure better protection, since we are somewhat eliminating competitive seal selection here, is the requirement that the procuring parties, anybody who's issuing the procurement, does still have to put together their solicitation. They still have to put something together to put out and keep track of that. And so if they can do that and keep track of it and hold on to it, that will help prevent any future issues. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. I mean, document is really the name of the game. Like, as we increase limits, as we provide, you know, for micro purchases and for, you know, some of these other not competitive processes, it, you know, as long as the programs can keep documenting efforts they've made to hire Navajo businesses and documenting the reasons why they're using the procurement method they're using and put it in the file, that's going to help. And we really want to make sure that, especially with federal dollars, that we're not, you know, ARPA, CARES, all that fun stuff. I feel like we're probably all a little traumatized from it, but also just to make sure that, you know, we can, if anyone ever questions us, the program can always go back and say, this is, you know, like small business regulatory department, they have all the letters, they can show all the letters they can send out, they can show no one responded to them, you know, and so that's just always in their files for these contracts. And so then going down to the micro purchases procurement, it's really what you guys already approved, right? 10,000 and under, allowing people to purchase services and goods under $10,000. We do have language in here that says they need to comply, right, with NABOA to the greatest extent possible, because we always want to make sure that our programs are thinking about that. So when they're micro purchasing, having them still being able to document to some extent that they've looked at source lists, they haven't seen anyone, or things of that nature. That's all, or that maybe they micro purchased and they hired a priority one, right? These are the things that are going to help. That are going to help them if their procurements ever get challenged. So I don't want to get too much. I feel like we kind of micro purchases has been discussed a little more recently, so I don't know how much we need to go too much into that. Emergency procurement, everyone's favorite, man. Everyone loves an emergency procurement right now. We love it. Oh God, emergency. I would say the biggest change is we've tried to simplify this in the regulations. Your current emergency procurement in the Act is not that onerous. It's really the regulations where you see a lot of the requirements for the emergency procurement that I think people get a little frustrated with. So we tried to slim those down in the regulations. We've tried to make the approval process a little easier, but also to provide clear guidance in regards to what's an emergency, right? Because a lot of times people are like, drought, we've been in a drought for 10 years, we're in an emergency, right? And to say that you can emergency procure, but it has to be for the flood in Shenli. If you're going to use emergency procurement, it has to be goods and services that are responding to that flood at that moment. Right, it can't be things that are going to be used after 5 months, right? So trying to kind of give more guidance to chapters and to the departments on what is an emergency. And then, of course, again, this is the current law, but it's currently in the Act, and then we just continued it as making sure that you do the best you can to comply with NABOA, to hire priority businesses even when you're emergency procuring, documenting, saying, there's no one that does dam removal on or dam repair on the NABOA, just making sure the programs continue to document it. That's what they're supposed to do now, and just continuing that compliance moving forward. And then Lily, is there anything else for emergency? Any big things?
No, I would just say that even though it looks like it's completely new language, it's actually very consistent with what is currently already in the regulations. It's just hopefully easier to understand, including the need to get concurrences. That is actually currently the same as what has already been in there. Since we all know how to do that now.
We do only have one review, yeah, and we took it down from 2 reviewers of emergency procurement to just 1. So hopefully that will make the process faster as well.
That's in the regulation.
Yeah, that's in the regulations.
Right.
Because that's where a lot of, like I said, your emergency procurement in your Act is very brief already. So we just try to slim down what's in your regulations, because that's where people get really tripped up today.
It currently still has all of the original reviewers in it.
Oh, it does?
Yeah. I was told not to get rid of them. But I'm happy to.
Where is that at?
So that is if you look at your procurement regulations, that is in the...
Page 52?
Yeah, page 52. No, emergency procurement is 36.
Oh, okay.
36. Take a gander. Again, happy to revise and happy for feedback on this stuff, you guys. Looking at you, OC. The other 2 things we did is direct source procurement and sole source procurement. Currently we have, so this is really, this is the revision to sole source. So sole source is not fun on the Navajo Nation. The procurement, I don't know, this is pre-us. So sole source in the current Procurement Act is pretty brief. Sole source in the regulations currently is kind of a mess because it doesn't jive with what's in the Act. And so I forgot what year it happened, but prior to me coming on board, the Department of Justice issued a memo where they trimmed down what's in the current sole source section of the regulations so that the section, sole source section of the regulations comply what's in the act. So what BNF originally approved for sole source is not what we do. We do this other thing that that's in a DOJ memo to try to make the act and the regulations work together. So the big change that you guys are seeing, so we try to redo all that, because really for sole source, it's goofy. There has to be only one vendor in the geographic area. What's geographic area? Is it RAMA? Is that the geographic area? Is it the Navajo Nation? Is that the geographic area? You know, there's all these things have led to a lot of issues in trying to how to use sole source. And a lot of confusion amongst our programs. So we tried to make it all, so we got rid of sole source, we got direct source procurement, and we got solo source procurement, which is really both, which is sole source kind of torn apart. Direct source procurement is when you can't, there's 3 times you can use. Lily's gonna have, I know Lily's gonna correct me because I'm always getting these two confused. There's 3 times you can use direct source procurement. Utility companies, right? NTUA, Jemez, Continental. Is there only one utility company in your area? That's when you can direct source. You don't have to do a competitive bid. You don't have to do any of these other ones. You can just direct source to that utility company. Have you tried to procure, but you can't? You know, no one's responding. That's a common complaint that we get a lot from our programs. I put out an RFP, no one responded. I did it twice, I still am not getting any response. Then that allows them to direct source. So they don't have to keep competitive bidding, they can just go to one source and say, hey, can you do this? Like, for instance, Crystal had a water tank that needed to be procured, that needed to be fixed. No one was, they put out like 2 or 3 RFPs for it. No one was, I think they responded, but they were all overpriced. So finally, CPMD was like, can we just give it to this one company? We know they can do it. And so that's when they would be able to direct source, be like, yes. So, but what I had to do was just like, I had to do a sole source memo. I had to try to figure out the justification to make it fit into these rules, like this particular law that we have, which it didn't fit that great into. But they couldn't get anyone to respond. So what is the program to do? So this allows them that ability. If a program keeps trying to procure and they can't find anybody to respond to it who within the maximum feasible price that they've determined, they can just go to one source and say, we'd like to give this to you. The other one, what's the other one, Lily? I almost had them all memorized.
So the last one is when you have the situation where it's a contractor who has a very particular past experience with a product that you're trying to now complete, update, implement, whatever it is. 2 separate examples would be you have partial architecture drawings that you're trying to get finished because you have funding again, and it's going to be cheaper and will not waive liabilities and warranties if you go to the original architect, as opposed to having to do a competitive procurement and hope that they respond. Or we have software systems that are implemented and overseen by certain companies. It'll be better to be able to go to the original company or the company that owns the software system as opposed to a third-party vendor, just to make sure that we're able to get those set up.
So trying to make it easier trying to make it a little easier for our clients here, especially that architect one, right? Because it's like you hired the architect, you didn't get funding, you got funding 5 years later, you'd like to just hire them back on. I know that at least because that's something my clients deal with a lot. So that's trying to help them be like, you don't have to do all these crazy things. You can just go right back to that architect. Solo source has, when there's only one vendor that can do the job. And this kind of came out of the discussion that we were, at least part of the discussion we had with OPVP around the micro purchases with like Fish and Wildlife. There's only one vendor who maybe has a particular product and you need that product, right? So this is when you can, this would be an example of when you can sole source. If there's something very like trademark specific, something that like only one vendor can give you, that's when you can just go to that one vendor. And I know there's more to it, Lily, so do you want to explain that the other part?
I mean, that's a really good summation of it. It's really just, there is only one available company. That's it. And this is the current sole source process, but limited. So it's, this company owns the patent for the thing that I have to have. And so if there's only one place to go, then we just go to that one place. We just don't worry about it. Because why would we procure for a product where the patent is owned by one company? And so we're definitely not going to get any other responses. The section is written broadly to encompass any kind of potential situation where that might present itself, particularly in like copyright for software, patent, or construction methods or trade secrets. But it will probably really only be utilized in situations like patent protections or intellectual property protections. The solo source procurement method should be an incredibly rare method. It probably will not be used a lot. I say that, but who knows? Most things would or should fall under the direct source procurement.
So those are all those are all the different methods to procure.
Construction.
Well, before we get into construction.
Okay.
Before we get into construction, those are the methods to procure. And then you use these methods for all the different procurements. And I kind of, before we could talk about some of the construction specific stuff, I just wanted to pause and see if there are comments or thoughts.
Can I add one thing first?
No, not allowed.
No. Oh no.
Go ahead.
I don't know if we made it clear throughout all of this, but there isn't a monetary limit on these procurement methods other than the micro procurement and the small procurement. So long as they fit within the criteria of that method, you can use it. And that also means that if someone is trying to buy $50,000 worth of a good, they could either issue a small purchase procurement for it or do competitive sealed bidding depending on their preference. There's not necessarily you must do it this way. And that is to increase the benefit to the Navajo Nation should something just an increased competitive sealed bid be more better. And so I just wanted to make sure that we understand that the monetary values kind of apply to every other method of procurement, but the other methods do not have monetary values. So small purchases and micro purchases are the only ones with monetary values.
Thank you, the Department of Justice. I'm going to ask, let's see, does this conclude the presentation on all the methods?
These are all the methods. Yeah, on all the different methods for procurement that you can use.
Great. I'm looking at the under struck out version. That one helps a lot. So thank you. That there's two versions of everything. Members of the Budget and Finance Committee, do we have any questions on the presentation?
I do.
Speaker Damon?
Oh, did you have a question? No. Oh, I have a question. Sorry.
Okay.
First of all, thank you very much. I know that the 23rd Council Budget and Finance Committee tried to start it off with public outreach and trying to get this going then, and then in 2018 there was a draft document that was really set forth, but it wasn't this detailed. It was nowhere near this detailed. So thank you very much. I don't know how long this took. Takes some effort, especially for the comparisons that you're doing, actually the delineation to actually take an act and pull out all the procedures in there or the regulations and to have two separate things. So thank you very much, because now what that does is that if there's any kind of, let's say, any specific changes that needs to be done for the sole source or the rec source or something that comes back, we don't have to go all the way back to council now. This is something that can just be done at the Budget and Finance Committee. So the needs is there to change a lot of these different options. I mean, once it's approved, once amendments go through the process. I know that the observation that I'm looking at is that moving from 50,000 to 100,000, I would even suggest it's probably not going to happen, but mirror the federal government's There's higher.
Right, 250.
Yeah, there's
Versus
$250,000. So, I guess my first question is, when we're going from 50 to 100,000, is there a specific need that the reason why that there was 100,000 was the benchmark in this recommendation? Is that something that was considered because of the recommendation from a certain department? Or is that what the Department of Justice specifically came up as a recommendation due to the size of different requests that are coming through your office to review? And that was something to say, okay, well, there's nothing really above that threshold that really makes us to think that it should be higher than that. But my question is there a reason why that it just, I guess the ceiling right now is recommended at 100,000? That's my first question.
We did discuss it with with business regulatory, and it is that tension between raising it to the 250 to the feds, but then do we raise it? Or are we going to get challenged by Navajo businesses by saying it's because you've raised it so high, we aren't getting any contracts. Because you're not doing competitive, right? Because once you get rid of the competitive process, you don't give priority. And once you don't give priority, a lot of our Navajo businesses could say, well, I'm not, like the construction companies, right? They're the ones who'd be affected, because if you're doing the construction between 100 and 250, that's when you could potentially run into the construction companies. I will say, but even then right now, what are they? Like most of our construction projects, millions of dollars, right? $8 million, $15 million. So that was part of the idea. I think the discussion, and Nota can correct me if I'm wrong, we see a lot of Navajo businesses coming in at 100,000, under 100,000 projects. So like while you do see, some Navajo businesses coming in over 100,000, it's usually the architect construction firms. A lot of like the smaller businesses are coming in at under 100,000. Is that right, or did I make that up?
Yeah, that's pretty much. I mean, just in terms of capacity and what Navajo businesses are able to compete with, the whole point of MBOA is to give preference to Navajo-owned businesses. So we need to make sure they have the capacity to do that. And keeping it anything over 100,000, I would not recommend. I mean, just because of what we see with the contracts we review on a daily basis and, the need. So do you have anything to add to that, Alvin?
One of the concerns we had was the businesses that was from travel programs in-house. The process of having to procure anything, the old level 50,000 was too low. They were saying it was too low because they had to go out through the advertising, and that took time and it was expensive to do that. So that was one reason we heard to increase the cost to 100,000.
Yeah.
Is to lessen that cost instead of going out for advertisement, but just to go out for quotes.
At the end of the day, it's a policy call on how high you guys want to raise it. But these were just some of the considerations that we took in. So we could go up. You guys can always go up to the federal level.
I will say
that if that does get to the 250 threshold or anything probably above 100,000, you will probably see like pushback and a lot of complaints from the businesses. That's just my opinion. I don't know if it will happen, but I do see that happening. So
there's a potential.
Yeah.
And Lily, sorry, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say that in looking at other surrounding jurisdictions and their current price thresholds that aren't the federal government, and then just other ways that these small purchases are implemented, the $100,000 seems to be where everybody currently falls. Micro purchases for some might be 20,000 or 15,000, but 100,000 was in the research sort of the safe number comparatively.
Yeah, and in doing these amendments, we looked at multiple state procurements to see like what's kind of the common practice currently going on as well.
I guess my follow-up question is, because this is excellent work and this is the first time that I've seen this done since I've been here in my tenure, and this is what we did at the Budget and Finance Committee through your direction and your recommendations to change the regulation. And that was what, 22 years since that one was done. So my question to you is there in any states that you've looked at, or any other policies that you've taken into consideration to guide this process? Has there been any kind of what do you call that, when it comes to an end, policy comes to an end?
Sunset?
Resolution.
Sunset clause. Should there be, would it be a recommendation to put a sunset clause in this policy to say that leadership must come back together within 5 years to reevaluate this? Because I don't see this possibly happening again. When was the last time the act was updated? I mean, there's probably little things, but I don't think, was it 80s?
It was passed in the 80s, and the act, I think, was updated in the 90s.
Okay, so
Yeah,
still
Yeah.
25 years.
Mhm.
So there should have been updates a long time ago to this. So has there been any sunset clauses in any of the other regulations that you've seen?
Lily?
So in looking at other jurisdictions, there were no sunset clauses. Nothing that was a specific sunset clause on either a code or a regulation. Because of the way that I went through and streamlined this and taking most of the policy or instructional work out of the code, so the Procurement Act, and putting all of that in the regulations, there is a requirement for reevaluation. I think it's every 2 years of the regulations.
Is that in here?
Yes.
Of the
I will find
regulation?
it.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll find it and tell you.
Yeah.
in the regulations itself.
Yeah. So we have to come back every 2 years and dance this dance with you guys.
Is that, but that wasn't in there before? Okay, so that's in there now.
Actually,
Okay.
it was in there before.
It
for
was?
Every year.
Oh my God.
Every year.
Yes.
Every year.
Every year we were supposed to be here.
I did every 2 years to give us a little bit of leeway.
Okay. Well, that's good that that's, that's just in the regulations, huh? Sorry.
It's really hard when other people are talking what she was saying.
Oh, okay. She just said it's hard to understand what other people are saying when we're talking over each other.
Thank you, Shadow Delegate Amber Canessa-Crotty. We will have one person speak at a time, so I'll recognize who's speaking so that there's clarity between the discussion. So I'm going to ask Speaker Damon, do you have any follow-up questions?
No, I mean, you can, I don't know,
Okay.
that's my questions.
Thank you. Do members of the Budget and Finance Committee have any further questions?
Thank you. Shadeja, this is Delegate Crotty.
Thank you, Shadow Delegate Amber Canessa-Crotty. You have the floor.
Yes, so I didn't completely hear Lily at the end, but I wanted to ask, is that the recommendation to modify the amount to 100,000? I just need clarity if whoever, I'm not sure if there was a delegate who was identified to sponsor the legislation, but is then that something that we should be aware or informed when the legislation is dropped? Thank you.
Thank you, Shadow Delegate Amber Canessa-Crotty. Today we're just hearing the presentation from the Department of Justice. I believe Ms. Bobroff and also Ms. Tapahi have been CC'd on the email, and they're reviewing the legislation as well. Or sorry, not the legislation at this point. The amendments to the act and regulations right now. So they will give a presentation to the committee on some of their recommendations as well. So we're going to, the Budget and Finance Committee is going to hear the presentation today and then continue hearing the rest of the legal opinions from the legislative side as well, just so that we get everybody's privy of what is going on. And then but to the question about the limit or about the suggestion for $100,000, I believe RBDO or the regulatory office answered that question. So I'll give the floor back over to the Division of Economic Development to answer the question.
And well, as for the floor, I just took the consideration of my senior colleagues, and just from the amount of 164 contracts we process on a daily basis, and just dealing with the Navajo Nation businesses and the Priority 1 and Priority 2 businesses on a daily basis, and their concerns. A lot of the suggestion was to raise the limit to 100,000. We have heard suggestions for 250, but I do not support those. I just want to put that on the record. I would feel more comfortable with it being at 100,000. I am comfortable with that, and I do think it does not take out the competitive bidding for Navajo priority-owned businesses. So that's kind of where my stance is with that.
Thank you, Division of Economic Development. And I'm going to give the floor back over to Department of Justice to add any comments regarding the limit.
Thank you, Chairwoman. No other comments. We drafted the 100,000 based on the recommendation of our clients.
Thank you. Shadow Delegate Amber Kness-O'Crady, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I appreciate that. But since we have the controller or interim controller on the line, my question, and let me know to Deja if this is appropriate time, or I could ask later, is I'm always leery of how we spend money on Navajo Nation because of the challenges that we see with white collar crime and risk management, having a hard time to basically insure the nation on for cash losses. I would just want to know at what time could we talk about how this is going to be monitored, and just make sure there's some accountability and transparency, and then what does that look like if that's either a directive or if the Office of the Controller, or maybe it's that Office of Management and Budget that they're going to actually post these expenditures online, so don't have programs, like purchasing. In the past, some programs would like purchase luxury name brand bags in the name of purchasing like computer bags, or there was online tips if there was mismanagement of dollars. So I just want to make sure we're balancing out this conversation as we look to be effective, but also transparent, so that there's accountability. But Shadeja, let me know when that question could be answered on the agenda, and I'll wait for the answer.
Okay, thank you, Shadow Delegate Amber Kness-O'Crady. We do have the controller, or interim controller, on the call. I believe I'm going to ask Miss, let's see, Catherine, when, so was the controller given this copy at 1:44 today?
That's correct. The controller's office was given the copy at 1:44. They've been given the previous versions, like on April 30th, that we've been trying to keep them updated, but they didn't get this particular copy till today.
Okay. Shadow Delegate Amber Kness-O'Crady, we'll give the controller some time to review the document. It was emailed to Mr. McCabe at 1:44 today, and so he is a part of today's discussion. But I don't believe he's had a sufficient amount of time to review the changes. So we will the committee will ask Mr. McCabe to review the changes to the acts, and then we'll ask as a committee for his comments. Is that sufficient? Shadow Delegate Amber Kness-O'Crady.
I appreciate that, Shadeja. Thank you. And we'll look forward to the discussion, and as long as we could balance this conversation. But thank you for the presentation, and for my colleagues who are on the line from Budget and Finance, and other colleagues like from Resource and Development and the 25th Navajo Nation Council. Thank you, Shadeja. I'll continue to listen to the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we will, Mr. McCabe.
Yep.
Okay, the Budget and Finance Committee would like to hear your review of the amendments that have been provided to you today. So we will, our next Budget and Finance Committee meeting will be June 6th. If, sorry, I know you're busy adjusting to the new role, so, let's see. Is is 14 days a sufficient amount of time for you to review the amendments?
Yeah, that's no problem.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McCabe. We'll keep you in the loop, and the committee will, as Shadow Delegate Amber Knez-McCarty has pointed out, those are the concerns at this time.
Okay, and I used the document we received at 1:44 today as the latest.
Yes,
Okay.
the working document. So we're gonna we're grateful that you're on the call today. Thank you. So we'll be in contact with you, and then thank you. Okay, so
Okay.
does members of the Budget and Finance Committee still have questions regarding today's amendment?
I do.
Yes, Speaker Dale.
With, I know that there was specific questions that were defiant from, I'll bring it up, from when we got this presentation almost, I would say, 4 years ago about, well, not this specific, but a presentation that was identified to help move the procurement amendments forward. One of the recommendations at that time from the Department of Justice was that they were having a hard time trying to fix what the Supreme Court issued regarding the Innabug case. Now, those direct, that direct ruling from the Supreme Court, when they did their opinion, how does that impact, or is there fixes from what was stated in that opinion that you have in this NABOA recommendation at the time before us?
Thank you. The Department of Justice.
Thanks. It's not in NABOA, it's in the Procurement Act, because the current section in the Procurement Act that was at issue in that case is section 346, which has to do with the hiring of architects, land surveyors, engineers. And basically the way that section is currently drafted is that it says you don't have to apply preference to the hiring of those professional service entities. And the Supreme Court in Innabug said, you know, you have to give some preference. What that looks like, the court was a little unclear. But it basically was like, you can't just exempt a whole group of businesses from NABOA because NABOA is implementing Navajo's right under the Bill of Rights, Title II. I don't know if it's a Title II, of Section 2. So basically, that's why every procurement method we have here, and 346 is really now 343 current in the amendments. That's where we've put it. And all these sections we say that the program department has to think about NABOA, right? They have to do something that shows that they're compliant, that they're looking at the source list, that they're considering priority vendors, you know, even if they look at the source list and no one's on it, at least like, you know, or if they're doing a solo source, they're documenting that there's only one entity that can provide this particular program, and that's why they're not complying. That's why they're not hiring a priority, right? So we bake that into all of these to say, you know, you have to consider it, and if you don't, and if you're not able to, that you document it so that, you know, so that all our departments can show that they are trying to comply with it to the greatest extent possible. So that's really how that case is in here. I don't think it's a fix. It's more of an acknowledgement of what the court said and trying to apply it to every procurement in some manner that makes sense for the situation.
Thank you. Speaker Damon, do you have a follow-up? Members of the Budget and Finance Committee, do we have any other questions? Vice Chair Slater, do you have any questions?
Oh, Deja, this is Delegate Crotty with the follow-up.
Okay, Shadow Delegate Amber Knez-McCarty, you have the floor.
I appreciate it, and I thank Business Regulatory for bringing up how this would impact, and Department of Justice bringing how this would impact Navajo businesses. The Chamber of Commerce, they have been concerned about the procurement process. Have they been involved in any discussions or provide any type of training or a way to make recommendations? And in addition to the chamber, how about Change Labs, who have been pretty active in providing technical assistance to Navajo small businesses or micro businesses? Has anybody else beyond the government been part of the discussions or the recommendations? If not, then at what point can we pull them in to have that discussion or recommendations? Thank you.
Thank you, Shetta. Delegate Amber Canesva-Crotty. I'm going to turn the time over to the Division of Economic Development.
Yeah, just to kind of clarify, we did have some public sessions that I mentioned earlier in May, June, and July of 2021. At that time, there was a lot of concern from the Net Chamber and from the businesses in general on just OOC in general and how procurement worked and that it needs to be updated. And, you know, we did hear a lot of the complaints at that time. A lot of it wasn't directed at MBOA, and there were a lot of concerns with the Procurement Act. So it has been out there with the MBOA in some sort. As far as like public opinion for just the Procurement Act in general, I have not seen anything like that. But when we did our work session, there was some comments and complaints and things of that sort from the Net Chamber and from Navajo businesses. So that's my response.
Thank you, Mr. Silversmith. Shetta, Delegate Amber Canesva-Crotty, does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Shadeja. It does, and I'd just like to see how we could continue to engage the chamber and our small businesses to either understand the changes and how that could benefit, and if there's any possible consequence that's unforeseen, they just given a chance to provide that input. So those public hearings were during COVID, if it's 2021, and I think this would be a great time to go back to the chambers and to Change Lab or other businesses, Navajo-owned businesses, just to give them either like an update or see if there's any recommendations. When council last year was, there was a legislation to increase the sales tax. I remember a very active group of, concerned businesses indicating that whenever there's a change to the Navajo Nation laws, if they could have an opportunity to be part of, before the legislation is finalized, so they could review it and make their recommendations. So if a delegate has not been identified to sponsor, if we could make that recommendation or as a committee provide space for either the Net Chamber of Commerce, Change Labs, or any Navajo business who would want to provide some recommendations or comments on these new changes. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shetta. Delegate Amber Canesva-Crotty. The Division of Economic Development has noted the comments today. Members of the Budget and Finance Committee, do we have any other questions? Speaker Damon?
I guess my last question, again, thank you very much. This looks like a lot of hard work that you guys put into this, especially tearing apart the difference between ag and putting everything in the regulation portion. But I know that you send over this draft. How soon do you think this will be recommended for your final recommended draft?
I think it's for the procurement regulations. It's hard because it really depends on what you guys pass for the Procurement Act. So, we could recommend the regulations after we get feedback from Comptroller's office and are able to incorporate their feedback into the regulations. But as you guys move the act forward, you may change what's in the Procurement Act based on the legislative process, and that may require changes to the regulations. But I think, for our part at ECDU, The regulations are, at this point, are pretty finalized. We have to, as I stated before, we do need to go through and clean them up. There's some typos, there's some cross-referencing that has to be done. So I look at Lily, because I will say Lily is the one who's really done a lot of this heavy lifting. And so she has a better sense of how long all that would take. So if we didn't get any comments back and everyone was like, this is it, it's perfect, it looks 100%. Lily, how long do you think it would take us to get it, to take care of those typos and cross-referencing?
So basically, no comments, but everybody loves it and it's absolutely perfect. So just finalizing, it could be done next week. But that does mean that nobody can say anything about it, which is not the intended purpose here.
No. But once I guess we get to that point where we are done, I guess, incorporating comments, it would just take about a week to finalize.
So back in January, I filled out a form to sponsor just the Procurement Act, just from what was done back in 2018, and then I filled out a form internally with the Office of Legislative Services to drop that legislation. But I mean, this one can be done. So I'm sure I think what we can do is move forward with at least the top portion, the Navajo Nation Business Opportunity Act and then the Procurement Act, and then if there's any requests, because no matter what, if this goes to Budget Finance Committee, then to I'm assuming maybe since it's business regulatory, it might go to BNet or to RDC2. I mean, just regulatory, the Business Regulatory Act, and then it would go to NABI. But it still starts that discussion. So, like I said, there's nothing ever starts unless we drop a legislation. Conversation doesn't go forward. The forced conversation doesn't have those recommendations. So, we could still be here in 6 months trying to get people's input. But if we drop this within the next week, I think that we could definitely work together with the controller, and there's his input. If there's any other recommendations too as well, I think that maybe we could work together to, like Madam Chair McCarty indicated, to have possibly. If there's any other recommendations, if not through the comment period, there can be also other recommendations that can be made from any outside businesses or entities that could go ahead and put that forth. But I think that we should drop this immediately in order to force the conversation and get this to summer session.
Thank you, Speaker Damon. For the recommendation, do any of the members of the Budget and Finance Committee have any comments or questions in regards to the request?
I don't have anything at this time. I just want to go through it in more detail.
Sorry, what was that, Vice Chair Slater?
Pardon? Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you. It's just kind of in and out. Okay, go ahead.
I was saying I still want to go through it in more detail. I appreciate the overview. I also had put in a request, and I think we'll have probably defer to Shania, Delegate Damon. But it's just a lot of information to go over in only a few hours since we've haven't had the full time to read all of it. But
everybody,
yeah,
everybody can.
Thank you, Vice Chair Slater. So you're right. I think that the committee is going to take time to look over this, and because it is multiple pages. Is there anything, I guess, does the committee have any specific questions about any portions of the presentation for today? If not, I believe Chair Brenda Jesus does have a question.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank Division of Economic Development team and also to Department of Justice Economic Development Unit for sharing the proposed amendments to the procurement and also the NBOA. Now, working with Resources and Development Committee and having Division of Economic Development as oversight, and also Division of Community Development in regards to bigger size contracting for these bigger commercial building build outs. One of the issues that I come to understand and learn in listening to a lot of the staff that work directly firsthand with this procurement process, going back to the NBOA priority 1, the issue is so when there's a consultant or a A&E firm or a contractor that is solicited for, proposals are submitted, and the award is given to a general contractor or a professional consultant. One of the things that has, I guess, come to surface and we've learned is when a contract is agreed upon, there's usually a scope of work and a budget schedule that lies with these contracts. And oftentimes as priority 1, general contractors or consultants, they are overloaded on projects, meaning that when they submit their proposal, they have a lot of outstanding projects that aren't even close to 20% completed. So yet now the Navajo Nation projects are being put on the back burner, where now the deliverables by the certain milestone date is not being met. And I'm just curious how business regulatory is looking at this. And the reason why I say this is there are some outside consultants that are working with priority 1 contractors where they're at the point where they want to notify them with performance deficiency. And I don't know if there is a blacklist for non-compliance in regards to performance deficiencies that business regulatory was able to look at. And then the other big part of this is the non-compliance aspect with Navajo Nation Tax Commission. We have contractors out there and even lessees that are not even paying their quarter payments. And yet they are still on the source list as in good standing. And this is another area that draws concern. So I don't know how going forward this can be somehow provide more clarity. And then the other area is the form of contracts. You know, we have professional services contract, we have the AIA construction contracts that are pretty much developed by Department of Justice. So when the contract starts going through the 164 review process, oftentimes it's usually sent back in regards to I guess at the review process with DOJ that there's still some inconsistency either in the language change or whatnot, which, you know, puts the contract review or 164 review out a little bit longer. So with that, I know that honorable colleague Crotty did mention that was a consultation ever done? And I would like to also request if consultation was done with Capital Project Management Department under Division of Community Development to get their input on the bigger scale of project construction contracting. So those are just some of the few comments that I'd like to make. And again, I did talk to Catherine to see if she can come before Resources and Development Committee. And I know that my colleagues will also be posing questions. So those are just some of the main areas that I just wanted to bring out. And I do appreciate Madam Chair and honorable members of Budget and Finance Committee allow me time to pose these questions and comments. Thank you. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, Brenda Jesus for raising those points. I'm going to give the time over, I guess, Division of
I can-
Economic Development,
I can,
Department of Justice. Okay.
yeah, this is Catherine from DOJ. I can start. So Chairwoman Jesus, I think, let's see if I can get them all the questions. All right. So in order to, if you look at the MBOA amendments in what is now the new title or section 205C, right? Sorry, hold on. And then section 205C, this is where it talks about priority certification. And it does say that in order to obtain priority certification, the business does have to show that they meet the requirements and they receive clear procurement clearances from Comptroller and Tax Commission. So you can't get a priority certification or recertification unless you get those clearances. In regards to construction, we have, the Economic Community Development Unit does advise CPMD, and a lot of the changes, we didn't really go over them with this committee, but the changes to the construction services section, so both in the Procurement Act and the procurement regulations, there are specific sections for construction, because construction is treated differently under Navajo Nation law than even architect procurement. So if you look in the Procurement Act and the regulations, you can see some very specific languages that deals with that. And what we did in response to the feedback we received from project managers at CPMD is we removed, just like we did for the amounts in the small purchase procurement, we removed some of the limits that were included in the act and put them in the regulations as a way to, one, provide more flexibility to CPMD on changing these limits as time goes on, and we also increased limits. So bonding, right? Bonding got to bump up to 250. I'm looking at Lily's face on the screen, 250. She's saying I'm right? Because that's an issue that CPMD gave us a lot of feedback on. A lot of small Navajo businesses doing construction aren't able to give bonding. And so for these smaller projects, so by increasing the bonding levels in the procurement and moving those levels to the regulations, we're hoping to provide some relief to the Navajo businesses and give CPMD greater flexibility in contracting for those smaller, like fencing projects. We've also, there was another thing, bonding and
Blacklist.
the blacklist, thank you. So the blacklist, man, it's the never-ending question of the blacklist. So that's the debarment and suspension, which is included both in the act and the regulations. And under that, the regulations envision OOC holding that list. So that would be a list that OOC would be responsible for maintaining. There are procedures in the regulations on how we would, nope, Lily's shaking her head no. They're not in the regulations? Are they in the act?
It's in the act. There's nothing in the regulations right now.
Cancel that one. Sorry.
That was the one that didn't quite get addressed
Yeah.
prior to 145.
Yeah, so there is a process for the Navajo Nation to put bad acting entities on a list. The list would be maintained by OOC. So that is something that we're able to do internally as a government. I would say that's not being done right now, right? No one's doing that right now.
I will.
Speaker Damon has a quick follow-up question on that topic.
So is there a recommendation then to put that as a possible requirement in the regulations?
So Lily, do you want to, I don't want to confuse it anymore, so why don't you take this question?
So what I was going to say is the act has been amended regarding the debarment and suspension for areas for the blacklist to provide clarity on who has responsibility to do what. So even without very specific regulations providing procedural answers, there's still a requirement for everybody, for people to do things, and we can figure out who is responsible. I would like to include in the regulations more information, but debarment and suspension involves the office of the controller, so that requires collaboration because they're the ones who would manage that list. So it just, in preparing this document hasn't finished.
Thank you. Speaker Damon, do you have a
No, it has to be the.
Okay, I believe,
Preparing
were you still answering the rest of the questions that the Research and Development Chair was posing?
I don't believe so, unless Chairwoman Jesus, if I missed anything, please let me know.
Thank you. Speaker Damon?
Maybe that's a discussion we should have with the controller then.
Yeah.
When Mr. McCabe's available, then if that's a recommendation, put that information in, then we can add that in before the legislation starts.
Thank you. Mr. McCabe, are you on, are you still listening in? Mr. McCabe? Okay, I know we have staff from the Office of the Controller who is also sitting online. Maybe they can note sorry, what was the section?
Oh, sorry, it is, debarment is 6366.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I do remember one other question from Chairwoman Jesus Chairwoman.
Yes, Catherine?
I think part of it had to do with this idea that our priority ones are getting more work than they can do, and they're not completing work in a timely manner. And a lot of that, and I've heard the same complaint from CPMD as well. And part of that has to do with contract and contract management and project management. It's all about project management, man, because the contracts that we draft already have like penalties if the contractor doesn't complete the work within the time. So we put in the contract, like the programs have the ability to put in all their contracts, right? Set dates. When do they want the substantial completion done? When's the contract going to be done? And then within a lot of these construction contracts, there's penalties if they don't complete it by a certain date. Then they have to start paying like $900 a day. Right? But that's up to the program to enforce. So we can write these things and we can put them in, but if the program who's running the contract isn't implementing or enforcing it, then that's really where, at least for that's where I'm seeing the disconnect. It's like they have the tools in the contract to hold these guys to time limits, but you don't see them you don't see those time limits being adhered to. And a part of the reason I think they're doing that is because they know that they don't have people closely project managing them. And so it's one of those things where I think there's already the legal ability to bring because people are like, oh, well, we don't want to give them to priority one because they're overbooked. And you're like, we'll start enforcing your contract. And then I'm sure they'll start prioritizing our projects. So it's kind of a two-way street on that. You want to?
And just to add to that, they can justify that they're not meeting the qualifications and, they can, for past projects, say they've worked with them in the past and they didn't meet up to expectations. That can be part of the reason why they disqualify them.
Yeah, one of the criteria, one of the criteria you could have in your request for proposals is to say, must have project completed by this day, must demonstrate a history of timely completion of projects, right? And so you could say, oh, you're not, so then the contractor has to show, look at all the projects we completed and did it in a timely manner. So the programs have the ability to put that in their criteria, and then if the priority ones can't show that they're timely completing their projects, they can, they wouldn't meet the criteria of the proposal. So there's a lot of ways to kind of address that issue, which I know is an issue that's been raised.
Okay. Thank you for the answer to Chairwoman Jesus' question. Does members of the Budget and Finance Committee have any further questions? Don't hear any in the room, and I don't see any in our group chat. So does Chairwoman Jesus have any questions?
I'm good. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chair Jesus. I'm going to do a second call for questions from the Budget and Finance Committee. Okay. Do third call, and then I'm going to open it up to the other delegates for a few more minutes while we have the room. If we have third call to the Budget and Finance Committee. Okay. Do any of the other delegates on the line have any questions? Second call for questions. Third call for questions. Okay. Does anyone from Budget and Finance have any other closing questions or comments?
I guess just in my the request to follow up from here is just that we're giving the controller 2 weeks till June 6th to come back, maybe before the BNF committee. So I think in that 2 weeks, I think what we should do is a recommendation to the Department of Justice or even to yourself and to this regulatory office. If there's any other, maybe some tweaks that you might make to that, then that can be presented back at the BNF committee. So I think we could have this on the record as a formal final report before we go ahead and go back to the idea of concept of drafting the legislation. And then also asking that of, I guess, more descriptive input on what the Business Regulatory Department has done or completed in 2021, like specifically state, I don't know if you have documents to say that where these public hearings or public input meetings were held and who all attended that, and that would give some clarity to not only Madam Chair Crotty, but also Madam Chair Jesus with their questions. And there'll probably be other questions too as well. So, and that really gives, it gives them like some enlightenment to know that these are the companies and this is the organization. Like, for example, the Nate Chamber of Commerce was the one that was privy to dropping some recommendations. And what recommendations from that did I actually see as were put into here? And I think that should be followed up too as well, just so that they know what was actually recommended from these organizations and when those were held. Because I know, I don't know if the former Resource and Development Committee was a part of those discussions at that time. But that would be really good to have that information so that if there's any update that's requested, at least we know we got that input from these organizations. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Speaker Damon. Thank you for the recommendations. And so we look forward to the continued discussion and just the clarity. I think that outlining, also I agree that outlining when the meetings took place and who was involved is very important, because this legislation is going to likely, go before the entire council, and that's where all of the rest of the council is going to want to know who provided this input, how long it's taken to get to this point. So again, we thank you for your hard work and many years of service to the Navajo Nation regarding the Procurement Act and the Business Regulatory Act. And before we close out, I think Speaker Damon has a few last comments.
I just want to thank Lillian Swales. I've never met you before, I don't think, and I don't know if you're at Department of Justice headquarters but I just want to say thank you very much too, as well as being a portion. And I heard driving in that this is your baby, this is what you've been working on. So I thank you very much for taking the time to really separate a lot of this between the two, not only the act, but also making sure the regulations are easier accessible to a modification in the future for future leadership and for future departments to make those recommendations. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Lillian, and thank you, Catherine, and thank you to the Division of Economic Development as well as the Comptroller's Office for being a part of today's discussion.
We'll change it.
Madam Chair?
Is this Lillian?
This is Dana.
Oh, Dana.
This is Dana. Can I say something? And I apologize for interrupting.
Hi, Dana. Yes, we're before we close out today's session.
Okay, yeah, this will just tie it out a little bit. I'll just give you dates. Also, Office of Legislative Counsel, thank DOJ for all their hard work over the years on. So Office of Legislative Counsel will try to have its recommendations and such out early next week, give everybody time to go over them and such. But what I wanted to just point out that if the goal is to get this to summer session, it will end up needing to go to Law and Order Committee, Budget and Finance Committee, NABI, and Council. If Budget and Finance wants it to also go to the other committees, there is a legitimate argument that could be made that it should go to those committees also, but technically it doesn't have to. Just BNF, Law and Order, NABI, and Council. I think the late date that the legislation could be dropped to catch Law and Order, Budget and Finance, NABI, and Council at the summer session is June 27th. So that should be able to get you to summer session. The sooner, I think, the better that it gets dropped, because I'm suspecting that there will be a request for work session. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
3 weeks after that, right?
There is a motion to adjourn today's work session. Do we have a second? Do we have a second to adjourn today's work session?
Yeah, sing happy birthday to the birthday boy. Thank you. It's not over yet. We gotta sing the birthday. Everybody, happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear sweet Amy. Happy birthday to you.
The Budget and Finance Committee has a cake for 60 days. I guess, and then Gentleman, second the motion. And then Ms. Nelson, can you do roll call vote?
Roll call vote on the adjournment. Mardo Esther, how do you vote?
Green.
Thank you. Mardo Esther votes green. Honorable Norman Mbagay, how do you vote?
Red. Oh, green.
Thank you. Honorable Norman Mbagay votes green. Honorable Amber Kenneth Cardi, how do you vote?
Shadid, this is Delegate Amber Kenneth Cardi. I vote thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Amber Kenneth Cardi votes green. Honorable Carl Slater, how do you vote? Honorable Carl Slater, how do you vote? Honorable Seth Damon, how do you vote?
I vote green.
Thank you. Honorable Seth Damon votes green. Madam Chair, we have 4 members voting in the affirmative for opposing and 1 member not voting, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. And with that, we're going to close today's work session. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. Safe travels.
Thank you.